Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Cybermancy Virtual Arena, and it's from C Forever Games. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, what I'm going to encourage you to do is go to the official Kickstarter project page to find out more information than I could possibly tell you here. To do that, all you have to do is follow the link either in the top corner of your screen or down in the description section underneath this video. Go to that page, find out more information, and hopefully consider backing the project. Now, Cybermancy Virtual Arena is a competitive card game, a combat-oriented card game. You and the other player are the titular Cybermancers, fighting in a virtual world of cyberspace with these virtual warriors, which in this core set are actually a tribe of humans, and taken from throughout history, and a tribe of undead who look like something straight out of monster movies. And you're going to be pitting them against each other. And I should also mention that this is a deck building type game, so you're going to make your deck ahead of time, and you could even theoretically mix together these two tribes as well if you and your opponent agree to that. But in any event, you're going to take them into combat, you're going to fuel them with CPU and RAM, the resources of the cyberspace world, and then fight against them to try to take out your opponents. But of course, it's not quite that simple. And there's a lot of twists and turns with the abilities of the cards and so on and so forth. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played with a prototype copy of the game. So just do bear in mind that what you see here, some things may be final, like some of the artwork and such. Some things may change, some of the rules might change. Some of the components you're going to see here are just sort of makeshift things that I had to use. So do bear in mind that those things will change in the final version, and that's why you need to go to the Kickstarter page. But then in any event, we will come back and discuss it further. Cybermancy Virtual Arena is a competitive, combat-based card game primarily for 2 players, although it also is playable as a multiplayer game with 3 or 4 players, or a 2v2 team game. Each player is a Cybermancer, fighting each other in a virtual world with a tribe of virtual warriors gathered from history and fiction and represented by pre-built decks of cards. You'll each need to use the primary resources of cyberspace, CPU and RAM, to summon these warriors and hurl them at your opponent. If you can break through their defenses and reduce their health to 0, you'll win the game. The most important part of the setup is building your summoning deck before the game starts. The core set of Cybermancy comes with 2 sets of tribe cards, humans and undead. You must build a deck of 30 of these creatures, using either a recommended deck list or your own strategy. While it's usually a good idea to stick to one tribe, it is possible to mix humans and undead together. But if you have 2 sets of Cybermancy, you may still only put no more than 1 copy of any creature in your deck. You and your opponent may optionally choose to draft cards every game as well, instead of pre-building these decks. Every creature has the same basic layout for their card. The top left corner has the CPU cost to summon it, and the top right corner has the RAM cost. The bottom left diamond symbol is the creature's attack value, while the bottom right shield symbol is the creature's health. While the text box in the middle is sometimes blank, it can also contain special abilities unique to that creature. For example, some abilities can buff your creatures or debuff your opponent's creatures. Some creatures get to be summoned directly to the front line to block your opponent's creatures. And each tribe can also have unique abilities. Some undead can actually create new zombie crawlers from dead cards, while some humans can promote an already summoned unit to the front line when played. When finished, each player should shuffle their deck and draw 7 cards for their starting hand, which they keep hidden from their opponent. You have 1 opportunity to discard as many cards as you like and redraw the same amount from your deck. Any discarded cards are shuffled back into the deck, and you're stuck with your new hand. Next, shuffle the 2 power decks separately, CPU and RAM, the fuel to summon your creatures. Each deck has multiple denominations from 1 to 5. Each player draws 5 cards from each deck and lays them out face up to the side of their play area. Just like with your creatures, you have 1 chance to do a redraw from each power deck in the same way. Nearby, make a supply of buff and damage tokens for later use during the game. Each player has health tracker cards that they'll use as their health goes up and down throughout the game. Set it at the starting total of 30 for now. There is also a CPU and RAM power level tracker card that each player has, which should each be set to 1 for the first round. Randomly determine the start player and begin the game. Every round of the game is broken down into phases. The first phase is the main phase. Each player will alternate taking turns, starting with the chosen start player. During a player's turn, they can perform 2 different actions or just one of them. The first is summoning 1 or more creatures from hand. To do this, you need to discard enough RAM and CPU cards from your play area to cover the costs at the top of the summoned cards. If you're summoning more than 1 creature, you add up their costs to determine what you have to pay. You can overpay, but the extra points are lost. The other very important thing to remember is that the levels on your CPU and RAM tracker determine the maximum cost of the creatures you can summon for the round. So, for the first round, you can only summon creatures whose RAM and CPU costs are no greater than 1 for each of them. Creatures who are summoned are placed into your main area, but they are placed sideways to show that they are buffering, which means they won't be able to attack on the first turn they're summoned. Some creatures have the Battle Ready ability and will not need to buffer, which means they may attack immediately, and you would probably want to do this. Still, other creatures have the Frontline ability, which literally means they get placed immediately into the frontline section of your player area and can then be used to block. Speaking of all that, the other action you may take on your turn, if possible, is to attack with one of your active creatures. You must choose a target for this attack, either an active or inactive enemy creature on the field, or the opposing Cybermancer directly. However, if your opponent has 1 or more creatures on their front line, you must attack one of those creatures first. When a creature attacks another creature, their damage is applied simultaneously. Apply the damage to their health. If the damage is equal to or greater than the creature's health, it is destroyed and will be discarded on the next phase. If not, it survives, and damage markers are placed on it equal to how much damage it took. If the attacking creature survives, it is placed sideways to show that it is exhausted and cannot attack again this round. The attacked creature's status does not change if it's still active. A direct attack on a Cybermancer is much simpler. The Cybermancer lowers their health by the total of the creature's damage rating. The main phase continues with both players alternating summoning and attacking until all of their summoning is done and every creature is exhausted or inactive and cannot attack, or until both players choose to pass in succession. The second phase is the discard phase, where all destroyed creatures and used power cards are discarded from their game. The third phase is the draw phase. Players will simultaneously draw from their deck and add 1 card to their hand, and then draw 1 from each power deck and add it to their tableau. The fourth phase is the refresh phase. All exhausted and buffered creatures are turned upright to their active state for the next round. Finally, the fifth phase is the advancement phase. Each player advances either their CPU or RAM on their tracker 1 space, but not both. This will enable you to summon more powerful creatures from round to round, but you'll need to look at the creatures you have in hand to determine which track you actually want to move up at any given time. When this phase ends, a new round will begin, but this time the player who did not make the last attack of the previous round will be the one to go first in the main phase. The game will continue like this from round to round until one of the Cybermancers is reduced to 0 health, and the surviving player is the winner of the game. And that is Cybermancy Virtual Arena. Well, in the sort of vast genre of combat-based card games, and, I should point out that while this one can primarily be played with 2 players, you can do it with multiple players, you can do it with team-based as well. But despite that, or aside from that, in this sort of in what can be called an overcrowded combat-based card game genre, I think what sets Cybermancy apart is a few interesting things, actually, quite a few. One of them is, of course, the theme, and this is one of those themes that is to the benefit of the game as possible expansions, probable expansions later on, because you can have tons of different tribes, right? So you have humans and the undead here, but the sky's the limit as far as what creative tribes they can have in the future. And again, while you can have tribe versus tribe, you can also have multiple tribes versus multiple tribes, theoretically. And because you don't necessarily, this is one of those things too where you can have the pre-built decks, and for people who really want to play this game a lot and really hone their strategy from game to game, especially if they're playing against the same person and want to switch it up, then you can take that time, that methodical time, and really build your deck how you want to play it. But you can just do a draft too, which, because the deck size is only 30 of these creature cards, that doesn't take very long, and that can be add some randomness and potential new types of strategy, because now you're having to think on the fly from game to game. So there's different things there, and that can make it even easier to mix together the tribes as well. So that's one interesting aspect of it. But then when you get into the gameplay itself, it's the whole thing with the CPU and RAM just adds new dimension that I haven't actually seen in quite such the same way in other games. There's this ramping up because of the limits of your CPU and RAM from round to round. You slowly build up those trackers, which means in the beginning it's going to be very difficult for someone to put out you're not going to be able to put out a huge army, and you're not going to be able to put out like a huge monster bomb, right, to just decimate someone. So this is where it goes, where the strategy comes into play, is because you have to plan out from round to round, like, okay, here's the creatures I have in hand. No way I'm summoning this one on the first turn, because it's the first round, because it's just too much. The costs are too much. So, do I want to discard this? And, you can do that actually in the very first round, like get rid of these high cost cards. Or do you want to save one or two of them because they will be immensely powerful and useful later on? But you have to build yourself up to that over time and move your trackers in such a way. And that's going to take time, so it's just sitting there like a lump in your hand until that point, but maybe it's worth it for you. But in the meantime, you have to put out all of these quote-unquote smaller creatures, more affordable creatures, just to get protect yourself and to start whittling away at your opponent as much as possible. And of course, your opponent's doing the same thing, so you have to constantly look at what they're doing and see how they're building up their defenses and how they're planning on attacking you as well. So there's an interesting aspect there. Also, the fact that your opponent can see all the different resources you have out there, not the cards in your hand, but your two different types of power cards. That in and of itself, by the way, is also unique, having two different types of power, having to worry about both of them because you have to pay the cost for both on each card. And you may not have not only the limits of how powerful a creature you can bring into play, but also what you have out on your tableau of power cards at any given point, and how you choose to use them. You may have to sacrifice a 3, 4, or 5 card just to get a little tiny card out onto the field, because if you don't, you might be defenseless, or you might not be able to make an attack, and you just have to waste that power. But this is the kind of decisions you have to make during the game, and you always have a steady, if not small, flow of power coming every round, so you're not going to be penalized too hard. But again, it is a resource management game too, in addition to a combat card game. So what I think is important to note here is that it seems like I'm giving a lot of information, but it really is a straightforward game. This is the type of game where you can teach it very quickly to people and get the game set up very quickly as well. But the more that you play it, the more strategy becomes apparent. So it's going to be good for people, it's potentially going to be good for people who are very casual gamers, who maybe not be used to this type of thing, but are perhaps turned on by the theme and the potential tribes that could come in the future as well, in addition to the notable humans and the fun-looking monsters of the undead deck. So those type of people could get into it, but also people who like a crunchier game, a more heavier game, could see like, oh, okay, here's the strategy here, let's try building our decks, that type of thing too. And it doesn't play very long, it doesn't take very long to play either, so something to note. So if any of that appeals to you, or if you have a specific partner that you like to play these types of card games with, or multiple people that you like to as well, and you want to get in on that team game action, listen, you don't have to take my word for any of this. You can go to the official Kickstarter project page and find out more information than I could possibly tell you here. Again, to do that, simply follow the link in the top corner of your screen or down in the description section underneath this video. That is Cybermancy Virtual Arena from C Forever Games. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, for supporting our sponsors. Take care and stay safe.